Good evening. Thank you to everyone for coming together to join us for this really important and exciting conversation. My name is Sydney Morris, and I am one of the co-founders and co-CEOs at Educators for Excellence. I am also a former second and third grade teacher, and I am thrilled to be here with a special guest who is going to MC our event tonight, Tamika Mallory.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I'm so happy to be here and excited about this conversation. I think more like it should be happening. It's great to be with you and the entire E4E team. And most importantly, with the hundreds of teachers, education supporters that are joining us from around the country. And as Sydney has said, my name is Tamika D. Mallory, and I'm an advocate for racial justice, economic justice, and gender equity. I'm also the mother of a 23-year-old Black male who has been educated by the New York public school system, and I care deeply about these issues. I'm here tonight because I believe that there is no issue more important than these causes where we look at our public education system. Now, let me just say from the onset, I am not against any form or fashion that people choose to educate their children. You can do that in whichever way that you think suits them best and is best for your family. But what we know is that our public education system must be strong. That is where most of our children are being educated. And therefore, no matter what other mechanism or methods or systems you choose, we cannot abandon our public education system. Our schools are the best option to fulfill the promises of equal opportunity that is supposed to be promised in our nation's founding. It is a promise that has yet, unfortunately, to be fulfilled. I am here to talk about how important the goal of an equitable and just education system is, and also to speak honestly about how far from reality we currently are. We have an awesome event tonight that is grounded in the voices and perspectives of educators across the country. But prior to digging in, Cindy, can you tell us a little bit more about E4E and how it came to be? And while you're talking about that, I'm going to be getting my notes together. I have plenty to say tonight. I've got so many questions to ask and so many thoughts. I've been preparing for this, and so I am ready. Tell us a little bit about E4E.
You got it. Well, we really appreciate you being here and your commitment to public education. And E4E was founded at a public school at PS 86, a public elementary school in the Bronx in New York, where I was teaching along with my co-founder, Evan Stone, who you will meet in a minute. And we started Educators for Excellence because we saw that our brilliant colleagues, both in our school and across New York City, we loved our day-to-day work in the classroom, but we were also incredibly frustrated with the broader system that we were teaching in. It felt like new changes and new policies were constantly being rolled out, but they were being done to us as teachers, not with us. And so E4E was founded in 2010 on a very simple premise, which is that for far too long, teachers have been treated as subjects of change rather than agents of change. And we wanted to flip that dynamic on its head. So E4E was launched with two long-term goals that we believe are inextricably linked: the elevation of the quality and prestige of the teaching profession, and improved outcomes for students, particularly those who are impacted by the opportunity gaps in our country. And at E4E, we work towards these goals by building a movement of student-focused, forward-thinking, anti-racist educators through traditional boots-on-the-ground organizing. We run leadership programs so that E4E teachers can take on critical leadership positions in their schools, districts, states, and importantly, within their teachers' unions. And we support educators to lead advocacy campaigns to push for policy changes that will improve outcomes for their students. And since our founding, E4E has grown into a movement of nearly 35,000 teachers across the country. And we've seen our members' work lead to significant policy shifts in state legislation, district practice, and contractual reform. And we've also helped hundreds of educators learn how to run for, win, and lead in key positions in their unions, which are incredibly powerful levers for educational change, and ultimately helping to make our teachers' unions more democratic, more diverse, and student-focused. And so, Tamika, the core of our work is about organizing. It's about bringing teachers together to find solutions to the problems that they and their students face, and to build their collective power to shift systems that have failed our students and marginalized the voices of educators for far too long. And you are an organizer, you are an advocate, but there are so many worthy and important campaigns that you can be working on. And so I'm curious, I want to hear, why did you decide to get involved in this project with us?
Well, thank you for asking. And since you asked, I have an answer. I think that our education system is under attack, but it is an extension of the idea that we're under attack in so many different ways. I recently traveled to Africa. I just got back just days ago, literally. It hasn't even been a week. And I spent 3 weeks traveling to different countries on the continent. And I realized that the one thing we lack is education of who we are and what we've been through, and education that is real, education that's true, education that is not watered down, because there are some people who may just, and I want to give the most innocent definition of it for the purpose of this conversation, that some people just may be embarrassed about what has happened in the past. They don't necessarily want to share it. And what I realize is that understanding who we are, where we come from, what we've been through, and being properly educated is probably the strongest tool that we have. And while we know that certain information is not being shared with 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and very small children, because they don't necessarily need that, they still need a very strong educational foundation. Even if some of us may debate about what should be the content and what they should be learning, the one thing we know is we need teachers who are healthy. We need teachers who care. We need people who are not politicized, but rather very invested in the growth and the minds of the health and minds of our children. And we need a system that is not focused on who's the newest mayor, who's the newest president, senator, or any of those things, or what the latest trend is, but a real strong educational foundation. And so I believe that we are in crisis. And I also know that the mental health crisis that is against our communities in general is harming our ability to learn. It is a major problem that we don't deal with enough. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I support? What do I do to be not just a person who stands on the side and has an opinion, but rather someone who is active and actively engaged? And I hope that one day in life I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And how can we leave this system very pure and leave it where it is one thing that we have that our children go through, and they are not caught up in the politics of what is trending in our society at the time. So that's why I'm in it. I think our kids are struggling, but I also know our teachers are struggling, and there's got to be a better way. And I want to be a part of the solution.
Well, that is so resonant, and that is what we are constantly hearing from educators across the country is, how do we bring about that change that we want to see? And for us at E4E, that starts with listening to the perspectives of those who are most proximate to our kids, and that's our public school teachers. And so it's why tonight we are going to ground all of our conversations in E4E's Voices from the Classroom survey, which is one of the largest and most comprehensive sets of data on teachers' perceptions. And we're really excited about the release of our 2022 survey. And actually, this year we conducted two surveys, one that is a national sample of educators across the country, and one that is a national sample specifically of BIPOC educators, which is allowing us to see the differences between the aggregate teacher perspective and the perspective of teachers of color across the country. And that's not the only thing that makes it unique. It's also the only survey that is constructed by educators, analyzed by educators, and interpreted by educators. And so, in short, this survey is really by and for educators to inform the national conversation that you were referencing about what our students and schools need.
Well, let me just say that Brian Stevenson always says, if we listen to him, he's someone who I respect and I listen to, that we need to get proximate to the issue. If we want to help, we got to get close to it. We got to get our hands in it, and we've got to get dirty. And so tonight we're going to find out all the things that teachers, educators, and people who are working within the system, what they feel. And I'm really interested to know, when did you all start conducting this survey? So what was the reason for it? That's one part. But then when did you start doing it, and sort of what has been the breadth of the survey over time?
Yeah, so we started conducting this survey about 5 years ago because we fundamentally believe that policymakers needed to hear directly from the people who are implementing that policy, from teachers.
Right there, Sydney, just to be clear. And you flow with me because I'm in my thing. I'm in my groove here.
Let's do it.
This is not new. This is not something you started last week and you just got a few people together and you're coming up with your sort of ideas. For 5 years, you've been surveying educators and people who are actually working with students every day.
Yeah, and these are the teachers on the front lines, and this is a scientific, nationally representative sample of the cross-section of America's public school teachers. So this is a really robust data set that we are really excited to put out there to inform the broader national conversation. But, like we were talking about before, it's important that we listen, but that's not enough. We also need to be taking action on what we're hearing. And so we are hoping that tonight can be about action as well.
Okay. So that's cool. And we're going to look at data tonight. We're going to talk about what the data is across the country. And we're going to focus specifically, so I've been told, on what teachers of color, what they think, right? And so we already know that teachers of color represent a smaller portion of the actual teacher pool in comparison to the amount of students of color who are being taught within the public education system. But tonight we're going to focus in on what the teachers of color think. And then we're going to have a series of conversations with teachers and experts to discuss what all of this data means. And most importantly, we're going to be asking everyone to join us in some actual steps, things that they can do to be a part of the process. Am I right?
That's right. First, we're going to put on our wonky, data nerd hats. And then we are going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to do some stuff together to make change. So that's the game plan. And so to get us going on that, I am so thrilled to introduce you to the amazing group of people who are going to be joining us in conversation tonight. So first, we have 6 members of E4E's National Teacher Leader Council. This is the group of educators across the country who helped craft and shape and analyze this survey, and they're going to be speaking on our panels. We've got Arthur Everett, a high school history teacher in Brooklyn, Joseph Tadros, a high school math and science teacher in the Bronx, Daniel Gannon, a high school history teacher in the Bronx, Leona Fowler, a special education instructional support teacher and site coordinator in Queens, Jennifer Lopez, a fifth grade teacher in Los Angeles, and Shirley Jones-Luke, a ninth grade English teacher in Boston. A huge thank you to these amazing educators and leaders for all of their hard and really impressive work on this project. And we also have 4 amazing experts who are going to be joining us to give their perspective on this data as well. So I'm so thrilled. We have Tequila Brownie, who's the CEO of TNTP, Amanda Fernandez, the CEO of Latinos for Education, Roberto Rodriguez, the Assistant Secretary of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education, and Sharif El-Mekki, who's the CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. And we're so grateful to have all of these amazing partners and brilliant thought leaders, and especially glad that we have Roberto joining us to represent the Federal Department of Education tonight. So Tamika, I'm going to toss it back to you to get us going.
All right, Sydney. So thank you. We're having these 3 conversations, and I appreciate the way in which you have shaped the themes. Our first theme is focused on our educators and how the Great Resignation. Listen, folks, teachers are quitting. Oh my Lord, like we need teachers. I think one of the things that most people learned when their kids were in their homes during the pandemic was that teachers are really needed, because I don't even think that they knew the children that they actually had trying to educate them at home. And they learned how much they as parents don't necessarily know and how important it is to have a teacher. So we're going to hear about how the Great Resignation is impacting our classrooms. We have all seen the headlines about teacher shortages, district officials filling in, or schools actually having to close their doors because they don't have enough staff. We know the impact this has on our nation's youth. And so I personally can't wait to hear what teachers have to say about what's happening, and most importantly, about what we can do. So with that, I'm going to turn it on over to this other very, very intelligent young man who knows a lot about what's happening with our schools. And that is Evan Stone, who is the co-founder of E4E and a former 6th grade teacher from the Bronx, which is where I live. So Evan, you got to have something to say today.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tamika, and thank you, Sydney, for opening up this important conversation. I'm going to start us off by talking a little bit about the data. So really quick for our survey and data nerds out there, this survey was conducted with a national sample of over 1,000 educators. It's a really great sample. It accurately represents the demographics of the profession in terms of gender, race, geography, grade level, and type of school. But as Sydney and Tamika said, we also, for the first time ever, did an additional survey of over 300 BIPOC educators so that we could compare and contrast the perspectives of teachers of color to our national sample. Teachers designed this survey, and then we worked with Gotham Research Group, a top-notch research firm here in New York, to ensure we were conducting a valid and reliable survey. So I share all that to say this data is good, it is accurate, we can trust it. So now let's get into the data in our first theme. As Tamika mentioned, the first theme in our survey won't surprise many of you because we've seen hundreds of headlines across the country about teacher shortages, the staffing crisis in schools, and the risk that teachers will leave the profession given the challenges of the moment. Counter to the national narrative, though, what we found in this survey is most teachers will actually remain in the classroom. They're saying they're committed to staying in the classroom for the long term. 86% of teachers tell us that. But what was really alarming is the group that we need most to remain in the classroom is least likely to stay. Only 52% of BIPOC teachers say that they're likely to stay in the profession for their entire career. And the reason this is so important is we know that half of our student population are students of color, and only 80%, sorry about my camera, and 80% of our teachers are white teachers. So we really need to work to diversify our workforce. And prior to the pandemic, BIPOC teachers were already voicing unfriendly work environments, the lack of compensation for the extra work that they often take on, and lots of other reasons that they're leaving the classroom. So the next question we need to ask is, how do we keep teachers in our classrooms and recruit the next generation of educators? And this is urgent because enrollment in teacher preparation programs, including alternative certification programs, has declined by more than 1/3 in the last decade. As a result, when teachers resign or retire, fewer teachers are available to fill their positions. So, unsurprisingly, increasing starting salaries has long been noted as a clear way to increase teacher recruitment and retention. And data from our survey confirms this to an extent. The national sample of teachers believe higher salaries is the most important thing to do to keep teachers in the profession. But our BIPOC teachers believe more leadership opportunities and more professional development and support are the better incentive. So this shows that increasing compensation alone will not allow for the continued diversification of the workforce that we really need. So now that we've seen this data, I'm going to invite Tequila Brownie from TNTP, Amanda Fernandez of Latinos for Education Reform, Joseph Tadros, and Arthur Everett of our National Teacher Leader Council to join me in a conversation so that we can hear their perspectives about what resonates. And I'm also going to try to get my camera here fixed, so I apologize for that. All right. Thank you all for joining. I'm super excited for this conversation. Really quick, I'll throw it out to the whole group, and maybe we can start with you, Tequila. You've seen the report. What data point do you want to make sure we discuss and why?
Yeah, thank you so much, Evan. And thank you all for having me here today. I think the thing that I'll call out, so I'm a former school social worker. That's sort of my background and foray into an entry point into education. And for my own journey personally and professionally, the notion of not having enough teachers of color, especially because of how it resonates for students of color particularly, is really troubling, right? I mean, and it's not just a nice to have. And so I say that because it's the race of our teachers and the diversity of our teachers is inextricably tied to student outcomes in a very meaningful, tangible way. And so what's alarming in the data is seeing that, sure, teachers are not leaving or planning to leave in droves as feared initially, though there are some, I think, caveats and still concerns. We're not out of the woods. I want to be clear on that. That gap in seeing that undue burden show up in the data by seeing that distance between what teachers in masses are thinking about as far as staying versus how teachers of color are thinking is very alarming, especially when you think about our pipeline and our current data show there's already a gap in the diversity of our teachers compared to the demographics of our students. And that's only going to get even wider as we look at numbers like this. So that's the first thing I think that I point out. Rather than reversing the trend, we're actually seeing data that's pointing toward an exacerbation of an already disturbing pattern.
Great. And Arthur, maybe you can go next, and then we'll go to Amanda and to Joe.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. I would second what Ms. Brownie said about the discrepancy between teachers of color leaving the profession over the general populace. And I think there are some implications there for thinking about the culture of the system. I think there's something underlying that is driving BIPOC teachers to want to leave. And I think that has to do with not the, it's not, I don't know that it's necessarily about the money. It certainly is not about the love of teaching, but I think it maybe is the circumstances that you have to endure in addition to being there for your students. And so I think this is certainly an opportunity to have those conversations about school culture and about system cultures that seem to be presenting a barrier.
Hi, this is Amanda Fernandez. Thank you all for having me on today, and just a pleasure to be amongst such dedicated people to all of our students and families, and in particular, our students from low-income backgrounds. So, this data is, even though you know it, it's always difficult to keep seeing it surface. And especially during this time where we know that our communities of color have been so disparately affected by the pandemic, it's no wonder that the effects of the pandemic on low-income communities are affecting our educators of color in the same types of ways. And so, what I've been seeing and hearing, and from where I live in particular, around Massachusetts, is that we just can't ignore that, the Great Resignation is real, and more so than most other professions, these factors of burnout, becoming the school counselor, the nurse, the social worker, the increased load of all that teachers are having to take on right now. It's no wonder that we're going to see a big drop off in folks behind them wanting to enter the profession, let alone those who are enduring these challenges right now, wanting to stay in the profession. So I think that huge mental toll on adults is something that I'm not hearing enough. I'm hearing a lot about students, which is obviously really important, and we have to focus on student and mental health. We aren't talking as much about mental health toll on the adults, and yet we know how difficult that is. I was part of a conversation with the superintendent of a 90+% Latino student population in her school district. And that community was the community in Massachusetts that endured the biggest impact, death toll of the pandemic on their community, this Latino community. So it's no wonder that there's so much difficulty happening in trying to just support students and teachers to go through a level of trauma that I don't think is fully understood outside of communities that endured in the ways that they have. So that's really something I want to just tease out, because it's something I'm not hearing enough of being talked about in terms of being able to support educators and mental health. So as far as the kind of the big picture here on the Great Resignation, I think we've heard it. What we're going to see now is a big drop-off, continued drop-off in folks wanting to enter and stay in the profession, especially educators of color. And so this is where we want to have a hyper focus, but there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of policies and barriers that need to be removed. And as Arthur said, a lot needing to be done around the current cultures of support in our schools right now.
Absolutely. Joe, let me bring you in to get your perspective.
Thank you, Evan. And thank you for having me. So I am interested in discussing why BIPOC educators believe the best incentive to keep teachers in the classroom is more leadership opportunities as well as professional development opportunities, while their counterparts believe that it's just higher pay. So like, what lens are teachers of color viewing their profession relative to teachers who are white? Because the difference seems to be pretty significant from the data that we gather.
Awesome. So Amanda and Arthur, I'm going to take this one to you. What do you think some of the long-term risks are, or the opportunities that you see in this data? Like how do you think we should be using this in the field? And I'm going to, you've all seen the race cars behind me and my Zoom camera flipping. So we're going to continue to run with this at-home experience. But Arthur and Amanda, I'm going to go to you for this one.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. I don't know if I said thanks before. My mother would be like, where are your manners? So in terms of, I guess I'll start with the opportunities. I certainly believe that there's something to be said for having data, to have data-driven conversations as opposed to just anecdotal conversations about these issues. And so there's certainly opportunities to make arguments and ground conversations about what is going on in data, which allows you to then, hopefully prove your point in a more persuasive way, and in a way that takes this conversation out of, oh, well, that's just your feeling or that's just your experience, which I think sometimes happens when you're starting to have these difficult conversations, right? I also think there's opportunities to use the data to help continue to create pathways to bring BIPOC teachers into the profession, and also to start to try to address some of these concerns and eliminate the barriers that are preventing them from staying. In terms of challenges, I see a couple of challenges here. So one of the challenges, I was thinking about equity versus equality, and there's something in this country, right? The myth of meritocracy, this idea that everyone has a fair shot and that we're all equal. And when you start having conversations about BIPOC teachers versus white teachers, that seems to lend itself to that backlash that happens when disenfranchised groups start standing up for themselves. So I'm just wondering how we can use this as an opportunity to try to navigate the space to push for equity over equality, and to create allies in that fight, while anticipating that there may be some backlash, because we want to change the whole system. And so, while the focus on BIPOC teachers is great, I think also all teachers probably need to be benefiting from some of the things that we're talking about in terms of ways of being with kids and in terms of mental health and things like that. Like, I think there's an opportunity to have a larger conversation that's more inclusive rather than exclusive. But in this political climate, right, sometimes those things get politicized and they become divisive as opposed to inclusive. So that's a risk that I see there.
So I'm going to just focus on the opportunity, and thanks for the question. So again, we are in this moment of urgency, and in this moment where we have to act, and that's all of us. I actually, have been thinking, and I think I'm thinking this because I'm hearing it everywhere, that the way we do education doesn't really work for anyone anymore. It's not working for teachers. It's not working for students. It's not working for families. We saw this. And I think that's where the conversation needs to focus, is the innovations that are already happening because of, by necessity, many districts have already been experimenting with a number of different ways to help change the way the expectations of teachers in a school day. How long do they have to be in the school building? What are more innovative ways that they can have job sharing? These are the things that I'm hearing are popping up everywhere. And I think this is a moment to catalyze all of these good ideas. It's already happening. It's out there. We just need to uplift those ideas, those innovations, and start spreading them. And I think this is really the moment that we really must all come together. And I don't mean that with rose-colored glasses. This is a moment of crisis where we have to change and shift the way we are doing education in America, because it just simply is going to leave too many people behind. We will not have the staff that we need. We will not have the educators of color that we truly need, whether you know that it's an equity issue or whether you believe it's a demographic issue. Either way, this has got to be the direction that I personally believe, and I'm hearing a lot everywhere, that we want to be seeding innovation and starting to do new things as a way to start shifting the way we do education in the country.
I love that. It makes me think of a quote that I think, Arthur, you have in the paper, which is that, we went back into buildings that were burning and act like nothing ever changed. So with that, Tequila, I'd love to come to you. I mean, TNTP is, I think, the largest trainer of teachers of color across the country, but I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you're thinking about this work on this issue and what you think we should be doing.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, I think there are a couple of ways that I think about it. When we heard a lot of conflicting data early on about, oh my God, panic, panic, teachers are leaving in droves. Then another data, or, and a lot of this was anecdotal because we, unfortunately, as a nation, don't have really good data about, current state in real time, teacher vacancies and attrition. And so it's like, okay, what is the truth? What do we know? What do we believe? And so there's one thing that I want to point out. We were asked the question early on of, Tequila, is it a pipeline issue, right? Are we not recruiting enough teachers anymore? Is it a retention issue, right? Like too many teachers are leaving. We all know, and I think as you illuminated in your research, it's actually both, right? So we're actually thinking about, yes, we actually don't have a large enough pipeline. I mean, if you look at the data, this is not a new problem. Predated COVID, from January of 2020 to January of 2022, there was a net loss of over 500,000 teachers, like just net. So like, that's huge. That was just between those 2 years. So that tells us, and if we look at the ratio in our research in broken pipeline, where we looked at traditional prep programs, which is still the pathway for the majority of teachers, they are by and far mostly white. They do not mirror the demographics of students. And so that educator diversity gap that we calculated is there, and it's growing at a time when the total numbers are decreasing. So there's that piece. And then on the second half, I think is people have come up as we think about retention and what's possible. It is, I totally agree with Amanda, this notion of truly rethinking the role of the teacher. And you have to ask that question based on, like, what are we hoping to accomplish? I've been in a lot of conversations recently around, like, what is the true meaning of or the return on investment of our educational institutions? It's supposed to be the great equalizer, right? It's not. I mean, if you look at our data and you look at student outcomes, take a freshman class, a ninth grade class, basically you follow the math there. 9 out of 100 students basically are graduating with a 4-year degree, starting from that class. And so there's something about both that pipeline of the lack of talent that affects us all, not just in education. No sector is going to have a talent workforce if we don't solve this problem and crisis in education. And so I'll leave with just this notion that I think Amanda's point about the opportunity here for innovation. We're looking at barriers to entry, right? We saw states try to, waive some of the licensure requirements. We're doing analyses now to look at, did that result in as effective and more diverse teachers? If it did, why do we consistently have in place exams and requirements and hoops and hurdles that don't correlate to meaningful outcomes for students? Those are the types of things we need to be studying and learning more about, because those are the types of things that should move forward with us, that were born out of crisis, that should not go away. And I'll stop right there.
I love that, because that sets up my last question for this group. And we're just going to go with Joe and then Amanda and then Tequila. Like, there is a large amount of federal resources, and states have a lot of money right now. They might not in the future. And districts have a lot of money right now. So what should they be doing? What do you think states or districts should be doing to prioritize these issues? And we'll go from Joe to Amanda to Tequila.
So, the investments we need to be making are definitely teacher retention programs, especially for teachers of color. Programs such as Sharif El-Mekki's Center for Black Educator Development, Clemson University's Call Me Mister, and here in New York City's Men Teach, need to become priority for districts around the country. There's plenty of research that shows when a student sees a person that looks like them in front of the classroom, they'll perform better, they're less likely to drop out, and they're more likely to pursue college. And I was part of New York City Men Teach a few years ago, and they put a lot of work in to keep these amazing teachers in the classroom through a strong support group and meaningful professional development. And these programs must continue to grow throughout the nation.
Great. So Amanda, I'll turn it to you, and let's try to be quick if I can push us just for time's sake.
Absolutely. So I think at the state level, I agree with Tequila. States need to really be examining how emergency licensees have been able to open up the door to more educators of color, and what has been the effect of that in classrooms, as well as the licensure requirements that were loosened in a lot of states. And we really need states to look at those things as a means to open up more opportunities for educators of color to be in the profession. I agree with Joseph on the PD. We need state investment and local investment at the school level to support the professional development of educators of color. And I'll put in a plug that Latinos for Education is one such organization that focuses on developing Latinos in the pipeline for leadership in education, as well as Latinx teachers and support. So more investment in programs that districts can't offer, because there's a lot. There's many programs out there. Take advantage of those. So I will say that. And then the last thing I'll say is just some seeding of investment in this idea of innovation, and incenting collaboration across districts and other partners to really think about great ideas that can be seeded and spread throughout cities and states.
Great. And Tequila, what do you think? What investments should we be making?
Two things I would say, and it's under the umbrella of coalition. One is, if you think about as a policy lever, where we see states making traction is when we don't actually treat this as a K-12 issue. We treat it as a community issue. And so you see coalitions across sectors, between partnerships, between K-12, between higher ed, between Department of Labor, between your workforce development, right? So you think about the apprenticeship model that Tennessee has just rolled out. That happened because it was a broad-based coalition across sectors. Similarly, on the practice side, in our coalition, many of us on the call are a part of our Million Teachers of Color campaign, which is focused on a big, bold, audacious goal of adding 1 million new teachers of color to the field if we're going to close the gap. It's not TNTP alone that's saying, oh, we need to do this. Latinos for Education, for example, is a key partner. There and other is Sharif's organization and others mentioned. It's going to take all of us working at all levels, federal, state, and local level with districts, to get the right policies and practices in place to reverse what we're seeing.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you for your deep insight and context that you provided. I'm going to turn it over to Arthur, and the rest of us will drop off, and he's going to talk to everybody watching tonight about what you can do right now to help support the recruitment and retention of educators of color. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. And so first, I want to thank my fellow panelists. I learned so much from each of you, and I'm excited to dig into the information that both Sequila and Amanda shared. Second, I want to share what I think needs to happen to ensure that we have a diverse teacher workforce. We need educators at the front of the classroom to reflect the rich diversity of our students. And the data made it very clear that BIPOC educators are frustrated and considering leaving the classroom, and that they're looking for career pathways in schools. And that this, as much as anything, would help retain them in the profession. We also know that even if we retained all of our current BIPOC educators nationwide, we would still need more in order to address this discrepancy between the number of students of color and the number of teachers of color. And so we are asking you to call on your legislators to take advantage of two opportunities that they have now to recruit and retain BIPOC educators to the classroom. Okay, you guys ready? The first thing you can do is ask them to approve President Biden's fiscal year 23 request for $20 million for the Augustus Hawkins Centers of Excellence. These centers provide training for BIPOC teachers, and you can also tell your legislators that they can pass the Teachers Lead Act, LEAD, which would establish a grant program for districts, universities, or others to create teacher leadership programs. How can you take this action, you wonder? Well, you can click on the link below. There's a link, I think. You see it? You can scan the QR code there on the screen. These are two critical programs that would invest in bringing more educators of color into the workforce and responding to the top thing that BIPOC teachers tell us would keep them teaching. So take the next minute. Please join me in taking this action.
I think you can. Arthur, you have a lot of good action steps here. And so thank you so much for what you're offering. And the entire conversation has really been full, for if there's anyone who doesn't understand and know what they should be doing or understand the issue, I hope that you will listen to this conversation over and over again and be able to sort of pick out the parts that really resonate with you and to take the action that Arthur has set before us. As I have said many times, we are in a moment of crisis and our system is under attack. And of course, if our system is under attack, that means our teachers and our students are under attack, but we cannot be paralyzed, and we don't have to be, because we are hearing about the active steps that we can take to get involved and to be a part of this great challenge that we're facing. Our teachers need us right now. In a country where over 50% of our students identify as BIPOC and only 20% of our teachers do, we know we have an issue. And we can't lose more teachers than we already have. We actually have to create pathways and entry points for new teachers of color to join the workforce and to become educators and educators of color in this profession. The next challenge also will not be surprising to all of you. Since March of 2020, public schooling in the United States has undergone massive shocks to the system. Now, we all have been waiting for this part of the conversation. COVID-19 has done a doozy on our school system. The pandemic has impacted our young people. We've seen studies, we've seen episodes where there have been specials done on what has happened to our schools, our teachers, and most importantly, our students as a result of buildings being closed, schools being closed down where we did not know when they would be able to open again. And even when some of them tried to open, they had to close again because things were so vulnerable and so uncertain. So even with the heroic efforts of many educators and families across the country, because again, families had to become educators, they had to become partners in the education of their children in ways they had never done before. We know that education has been disrupted, and there's a lot of work to try to put back the pieces to bring the system together. And by the way, the system was already struggling. So this is not to say that we just need to return, but we actually need to strengthen. We need to get better. And so, Evan, I'm bringing it back to you to talk through some more of the data, because folks want to hear about the data. And so it's not enough for us to just say, as teachers, as parents, as survivors of this system, as young people, this is how we feel. That's not enough. They want to hear that there are actual numbers and there's data that represents what these educators are saying. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Tamika. The largest portion of the survey was asking questions about the impact of COVID. And the first thing we want to focus on is the mental health crisis that was talked about in the last panel. So from the CDC to President Biden to the Surgeon General, the nation is in agreement that the pandemic has had an impact on the mental health of young people. In our survey, 79% of teachers report that the mental health of their students is worse than it was before the pandemic. So to put that another way, 4 out of every 5 teachers, 4 out of every 5 classrooms are saying that the mental health of their students is worse than before the pandemic. This is truly a crisis, and one that teachers can't solve on their own. They don't have the training or the time, and so we need more mental health professionals in our schools. That's why 72% of teachers believe hiring more counselors, more mental health providers is the best way to support students. Mm-hmm. The next thing we wanted to ask about was the academic crisis. What are teachers seeing in their schools now that they're back in classrooms with kids? And the data shows us that only half of teachers think their schools often meet the needs of students of color. Only 30% of teachers think their schools often meet the needs of students who have experienced trauma. And only 1 in 5 teachers think their schools often meet the needs of the LGBTQ students in their classrooms. And it isn't just what teachers are seeing. The data is backing this up. According to a recent study from NWEA, at the start of the year, student academic performance in grades 3 through 8 was lower than it was in typical years. And this is particularly true for low-income students and BIPOC students. For example, the median score for Black third graders dropped by 10 percentile points. That means the gaps that we have been fighting against for so long have only grown. So students are behind, and so we wanted to ask teachers, do you have the tools and resources to catch up? And unfortunately, the answer to that is also no. We've been investing in curriculum materials for years, but the majority of teachers still tell us that their curricula aren't high quality, they're not aligned to their standards, and they're not culturally relevant to the students that they're teaching. Teachers also report that they haven't even been consulted on the development or selection of the curricular materials that they're using in their classrooms. And as a result, 9 out of every 10 teachers is spending their time downloading or creating their own materials. And this leads to more burnt out teachers and less effective lessons. At this point, there is no reason why every teacher in America shouldn't have access to high quality, aligned curricular materials that are culturally relevant to the identities of their students. We do have an opportunity to change this because, as we talked about before, there is a ton of money coming into the system from our federal government. Unfortunately, though, teachers have been telling us that they haven't been consulted on how those dollars are being spent. Only 11% say that their input was actively sought. And only 23% of our national sample think those federal funds are having a positive impact on students so far. Fortunately, though, our BIPOC educators are seeing more positive progress from those federal funds, with 63% reporting that it's been helpful. One thing is clear, though. Teachers do believe we need data right now so that we can inform instruction and investment. A majority of teachers are telling us that assessments are critical. And particularly BIPOC teachers believe assessments are useful and crucial to understanding students' performance. But teachers are also telling us tests are not perfect. And the best way to make them more useful would be to report student-based results in a way that's about their assets and not about the things that they're missing. We also want to make sure that they're actually focused on the things that teachers teach. Okay, enough of me talking. I want to bring the next panel up so that we can have a really important conversation about the impact of COVID on kids and classrooms across the country. So I want to welcome Roberto Rodriguez, Daniel Gannon, and Leona Fowler to the conversation. Okay, so now that we're all here, I'd love to start. What do you think is the most important data point in what I just discussed, and why? And let's try to do quick responses so we can get to lots of questions. And I'd love to start with Dan and Leona.
Great, thank you, Evan. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. And I think for me, the most important data point to discuss is not meeting the needs of our subgroups, specifically, as Evan mentioned, students with learning disabilities and students of color, as only 50% of teachers surveyed believe our schools are currently meeting their needs. So what does that data truly reflect? So for example, curriculum does not reflect the learning needs of our subgroups. It specifically fails to meet the opportunities to fill gaps in learning and social and emotional development. Also, large populations of our students are not gaining an equitable access to a meaningful education that reflects their needs and diverse backgrounds. And most importantly, we're failing to prepare them for life after their primary educational experiences end. So for me, that's the most important data to talk about, and I'm excited to be here to do that tonight.
Great, Leona?
Hi, I'm also extremely excited to be here. Thank you so much. But another very important data point would be social emotional learning. I believe it's the most important to discuss the data in the survey that's related to students' mental health and what teachers believe they need to support students social and emotionally. And why? Because we're all about supporting the whole student, the whole child, understanding that there is a connection between social emotional learning and chronic absenteeism, student attendance, and in regards to student behavior, and also academic performance, of course. It's extremely critical, social emotional learning, in this particular climate, especially because it helps students learn to cope. It also helps them learn to deal with the stresses and the worries of society as it stands currently and creates a supportive learning environment for students to be able to talk about their emotions.
Great. And Roberto, first, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'd love to know when you looked at this data, what did you see as most important?
Sure, Evan. Thank you for having me. First, just thank you for Voices from the Classroom this year. I think this survey is important this year more than ever for all the reasons you mentioned, right? The last 2 years have been unprecedented in their challenges to our system. I want to double click down on the data you mentioned of the nearly 80% of teachers that report that mental health of their students is worse off than before the pandemic. We are really in a youth mental health crisis right now. And we all have to acknowledge what our teachers have known for a long time, which is that when students' basic needs are not met, they are unable to access their learning, right? Our policymakers, our system leaders, and our parents and families are waking up to that reality in a major way. We have seen already globally 1 in 4 young people that have reported experiencing depression over the course of this pandemic, 1 in 5 that have reported experiencing anxiety. We know that ER visits are on the rise for young people who are looking for care for anxiety, for mood disorders, for other challenges that they're facing. So we have to get busy about really addressing that issue. We know that our students are 6 times more likely to access mental health services if they're delivered in an education setting, if they meet them where they are versus out somewhere else in the community. So we're really, I think the imperative there is how can we put these Recovery and Rescue Act dollars to work? We've seen a 65% increase in social workers, a 17% increase in school counselors, thanks to the investments of the American Rescue Plan. But we have to do a lot more to make that mental health infrastructure a permanent part of our system.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to skip over some of the questions we talked a little bit about in the interest of time, and that's a great example, Roberto, of how the federal dollars are already being put to work based on what you're hearing. I'm curious, Leona and Roberto, coming back to you, what do you think are the biggest risks in this data if we don't actually implement some of the changes that you both just shared?
Ultimately, you will have a failed, broken education system. That is a long-term risk. A failed system for students, a failed system for families, and a failed system for educators. This pandemic exposed a lot of the cracks and the holes that was already evident in the education system, from disparities, from equity issues, from access issues, from the divides that was in there. Here within this survey, the Voices of the Classroom, nationwide educators had opportunity to echo similar sentiment in this survey, and that's opportunity at the same time that the data is the evidence, for example, of how we can possibly fix things.
Great. And Roberto, I'd love to know, what do you see as some of the risks or opportunities here?
I really agree with Leona. I think there is opportunity in this data too, right? There's a chance here to not go back to March of 2020, Evan, but in fact to think about how we reinvent and re-envision and seize the opportunity to do things differently than we've done before, right? So the risk is missing out on that opportunity to uplift the teaching profession. I was with our Teachers of the Year yesterday here at the White House. It was a tremendous event. They remind us of what's possible in terms of the investments that need to be made, meet the mental health needs of our kids. We risk the opportunity to make those structures permanent, to double the number of school counselors and social workers and school psychologists and mental health professionals in our schools. We risk the opportunity of closing our opportunity to achievement gaps in our system, the opportunity to put a stronger curriculum in place, as you've mentioned, and the opportunity to redesign, right? To really think about how to move toward a more innovative, student-centered, personalized system that meets the need of every child. So, we should be focused on equity as our North Star in all of this work. We have a chance to reshape the system to do that, and we don't want to squander that chance.
Great. And Roberto, building off of that, I'd love to know if there's any, you talked a little bit about the investments in counselors and social workers. Are there other things that you all are working at the department that you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, Evan, we're really excited. We have $130 billion in funding out to every state now, making its way down to local school districts. And we're seeing really innovative ideas put into practice. In Kansas, the Department of Education is putting a Grow Your Own Counselor program in place where they're helping to put student service individuals into schools and helping them grow on a pathway towards certification. We have great models like Commissioner Penny Schwinn's model in Tennessee that's creating a teacher apprenticeship model and supporting a good grow your own teacher program. So the opportunity to think about diversifying and raising the bar on talent for our profession is huge here. We're seeing chances to deepen parent involvement. We were in Austin just recently looking at the parent coordinators that they're putting in their schools and opportunities to look at stronger intensive tutoring, right? And stronger one-on-one academic acceleration. New Mexico's invested $22 million to look at accelerated learning and intensive tutoring across their classrooms. So a lot of bright spots, Evan. I think the challenge and the opportunity for us is how do we systemize that? How do we bake that into the more permanent structure for our schools beyond the pandemic?
Those are all great examples of how these dollars can be used. So Dan, I'd love to turn it over to you and then Leona around what do you think we should be doing to create substantive change in this area, either with federal dollars or without it? Where would you focus? Absolutely. And this, I will just say, this is your chance to tell Roberto where maybe he should focus too.
This is a great line to you, Roberto. And I think Leona and Roberto brought up really powerful points that I want to hit on. That idea that the education system does feel failed and broken, but we have an opportunity here to kind of rebuild. And in my mind, that policy shift looks like reimagining what high school looks like for all students, specifically for our subgroups of students that have been left out in a way. So most importantly, when we reimagine high school, I think we need to start with ensuring the most vital stakeholders, students, their families, and teachers have a legit seat at the table when it comes to district level decision making. We need to ensure that their voices are heard and that our learning communities are truly meeting the needs and helping our families and their students achieve the goals for life, not only during their education, but also life after their primary education ends. And Roberto, this came across earlier today, but we recognize that President Biden has already created a plan that can help make this occur. And this plan is called the Reimagine the High School to Post-Secondary Education Transition. And although it hasn't been funded, we do need Congress to fund this immediately, as it will allow for a reimagining of traditional educational pathways to improve equitable opportunities for all students. The Reimagine the High School to Post-Secondary Education Transition Plan will lead to a $200 million investment in career-connected high schools. This exciting plan would support competitive grants to partnerships with local educational agencies, institutions of higher education, including community colleges, and employers. It will also support early enrollment in post-secondary and career-connected coursework, work-based learning opportunities, and academic and career-connected instruction across the last 2 years of high school and the first 2 years of post-secondary education. Personally, as a high school teacher, this is the kind of plan that could have long-lasting positive impacts on not just all of our students, but most importantly, the subgroups of students that have not received the kind of support they need and deserve. Thank you.
I would just like to add, there's a lot of things, as Dan mentioned, that we could support in federal policy, right? And we're in this space right now. For example, President Biden's budget request this year includes funding for hiring and training additional counselors, additional school psychologists, and other health professionals, and additional funding for community schools, which would provide wraparound services to students and their families so that students can be fully present to learn. Also, the Senate is considering a bill that would help districts pursue restorative practices instead of punitive discipline, which is a shift that supports students' social emotional learning. And in a much needed policy shift that unfortunately gets lost and buried in policy making and politics, is truly keeping the students and the educator at the forefront of decision making.
I just love all of those points, Leona and Dan. You know, I think these policy pivots, how do we think about a policy agenda that is whole child, whole educator centered, right? That does more to help support and build that robust pipeline. Really excited about the proposals that the president and the secretary have in front of us. Dan, thank you for mentioning the imperative and the opportunity for high school redesign. You know, our young people today, they don't want to learn in high schools that were designed, you know, a century ago. They want to learn in high schools that are giving them the agency that they need to shape their future, connecting with them earlier, giving them those career skills, that work-based learning, opportunities to earn college credit and post-secondary credit before they graduate, opportunities to get work-based experience early. So we have a real chance to advance some of these innovations in our system. And, you know, I think now is a perfect time to do that. We have a chance to build back something better.
So, Roberto, building on that point, all of the things that Dan and Leona just mentioned and the other pieces, like where do you, if you were a state leader and you're talking to state leaders and district leaders across the country, and they have these resources that thanks to the work of Congress and the Department of Ed and our president, we have these resources coming out, where do you think they should prioritize to make progress on these issues?
Well, I think the first thing they should do is something that E4E and I know many that have joined tonight's session support, which is to engage the voice of our educators. We have to, and the secretary reminds us of this every day, to practice being a service agency, which means doing more to engage and build on the lessons and the vision and the ideas that our educators are bringing forth, right? That they're living day to day, you know, as being those that are closest to where that equity takes shape with our learners. So listen to our educators and also engage our families as core partners. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that our families must be front and center as core partners in this work, right? And I think you know, when I was before I came to the department, working with so many teachers who were really opening new relationships with their families, with their parents that they didn't have pre-pandemic. So, you know, that's where I would focus. I'd also focus strongly on learning recovery. You know, we know that even in the best of circumstances, our students that have the greatest means, even those students have lost some amount of instructional time, have some compounded need for greater social and emotional learning. So, and certainly that's the case for our kids, you know, that have the greatest needs. So we need to double down on that. And then we need to get serious about addressing the labor shortage and get serious about a policy agenda that is around teacher retention and teacher advancement and teacher compensation. So those are the pillars. I think we can get it done. I have a lot of faith in our state leaders and in our school leaders to do that, to look beyond some of the divisive conversations that are happening right now and get about helping to support our students. Our parents, our teachers, and our principals are really largely all on the same page when it comes to what they want for kids, and that's to make sure that they can learn and succeed.
Great. Well, thank you, Roberto. And to that point, I'm going to turn it over to Leona, who can talk a little bit about what everybody watching tonight can do to help with these exact problems right now. And thank you to our panelists. And Leona, I'll turn it over to you. So.
Excellent. So first, I also want to thank my fellow panelists. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to talk directly with you, Mr. Roberto Rodriguez. So thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to be here to listen to educators' perspectives. I also want to share what I think needs to happen to address the challenges we discussed today and how each of you can support us. Voices from the Classroom 2022 shows that teachers are seeing increased mental health issues and needs from their students and shortages of social emotional support staff in their school makes addressing those needs even more challenging now than usual. As you just heard from Roberto, the United States Department of Education is prioritizing investments to support social emotional learning and the mental health of our students. In fact, they've requested that Congress spend $1 billion to help schools hire and prepare additional counselors, school psychologists, and other health professionals. Now we need to make sure that Congress prioritizes the needs of our students and this as well. So we're asking you to ask your legislators to approve President Biden's and the department's requests. You can do this by clicking the link below, I hope you see it, or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you so much for standing with me to demand support our students need.
That's another good one. Thank you so much, Leona. That was such a full conversation with so much information. And I hope that all of us who are watching and listening, that we're not just sort of listening as a part of our normal routine, but that we're listening to actually understand, and that we are really sort of taking in all of this information. Because again, the idea that we can't just take the word of or the experience and the experience of what teachers who are every day in the classroom and working with our young people and what families are feeling and what young people are feeling is a real thing, that people want to hear data. They want to hear problem solving strategies. And I just heard much of that in the conversation with these individuals. And Leona, I appreciate you and your voice. One thing I did want to say is that Leona was asked by Evan, what is the sort of like, what can happen? What's the worst that can happen if we don't address some of these issues? And Leona said we risk having a broken education system, and I guess one that we can't turn around. And I feel that we are teetering on the edges of that, and there are families, there are students, there are educators and advocates who've been saying that for some time. So after a pandemic and understanding what we're experiencing today with the political attacks against our education system, it's really, really, really dangerous. And so we have a responsibility, all of us, to work together to make some improvements. So you've heard some action steps. Follow those things. You heard from Arthur, you heard from Leona, you've heard from many others. Please do your part and get in the action. Don't just listen in, but be involved. So we're going to do this third theme a little differently. This isn't just about a crisis caused by a pandemic. This theme is going to focus on the attacks against our classrooms. Our schools have become political battlegrounds. And this isn't about critical race theory, because we know that in our school system, our public education system, with our students who are in high school, who are in middle school and elementary school, they are not learning critical race theory. It is a college-based curriculum. It is not being taught to our young people. So even though I am one who believes that we need to be educated about who we truly are and people need to know about the history, I also understand that our education system needs to be a place where that is really sacred and that it is not politicized. Let me just leave it there. So this is really about us preventing schools, it is about preventing schools from having important conversations about history. Again, not critical race theory, but history in and of itself. This is about attempts to erase the identity of our students. And I'm not going to bring Evan on to talk about this one because this is the goodie for me. This is my soft spot. This is what I want to be really, really close to, the urgency around this issue and this campaign that is out there to try to stop us from talking about the history of our students. So, and every single student deserves to hear about themselves and to understand who they are when they are in the classroom. That said, the data is clear. Teachers want to talk about these topics. Teachers want to teach history, true history, but it is politicians who are making the decision to pass laws to prevent our schools from being a place where students can understand our past so that they have and are able to deal with not repeating the mistakes of our past, but to move forward in a fruitful, successful, and healthy future. Schools need to be a place to unpack collective challenges, not to bury them. So before this panel comes up, I want to share a short video that has been worked on by E4E to help the entire country understand what is going on here. So check it out. And then when we come back, we're going to have two panelists on to help us dig more into this conversation.
We must eliminate critical race theory at every level.
Who's the real villain? History or racism?
A Florida school district canceled all civil rights lectures due to concerns over critical race theory.
Teachers and parents are protesting the racially charged lesson plan.
White students are subjected to racial guilt-mongering while encouraging
That's what they tell you about critical race theory. But here's the truth. Politicians have used critical race theory to confuse the public with culturally relevant curriculum. Here's the difference. Critical race theory is a 40-year-old academic theory that says racism is not just the product of individual prejudice, but embedded in our laws and policies. While culturally relevant education is intended to strengthen students' sense of identity by including their heritage and history. Despite the lies and misleading narratives in mainstream headlines, critical race theory is not an approved elementary, middle, or high school curriculum. It doesn't even exist in any of these classrooms. It is and always has been a college-level concept, but conservatives are working hard to brand all diversity-based teaching as critical race theory to stir the emotions of an already divided culture.
Our classrooms have become political battlegrounds where non-educators feud over our children's right to a truthful history. And the worst part of it all doesn't even include the ones actually in the classroom. 93% of teachers agreed it's important for children to learn to value and respect the humanity of every person and to reject racism. Despite that, more and more states are forcing teachers to stand at the front of their classes and deny the heritage of their students, and in some cases, themselves, resulting in educational gag orders.
This is not education. This is exploitation. 1 in 3 educators say that they are likely to quit at the end of this school year if they push for laws that prevent honest conversations and teaching reach their classroom.
This is the literal embodiment of what systematic racism looks like. And in 2021, 62% of teachers were concerned about systemic racism. When certain groups of people and their experiences get erased, we are teaching the world they don't matter.
Ask yourself, who's the real villain? History or racism? What's the motive behind hiding historical facts? The same energy it takes to ban history can be used to prioritize accountability. Now, we all have a decision to make. What's more valuable? Adhering to a divisive narrative or collectively dismantling?
This is not a victimless fight.
This is our legacy.
These are our children.
Don't erase history.
Wow. Well, listen, let me give a little clap for this incredible video. And I hope that you all will share it, that you'll get the content out there. You know, those people who are speaking against our history and trying to use critical race theory as a political ploy for whatever their agendas may be, they have all types of content out there, and they're very, very deliberate and intentional about their work and their efforts to discredit our movement. So we have to also have the same vigor. We have to post and share and really make sure that the content that is out there is truthful, that we are putting forth information that families, advocates, and everyday citizens can use. And so I hope that you all are sharing those videos, putting it on your timelines, and spreading the truth, because that video is in fact the truth. And I'm actually in it. So if no other reason, you can share it because I'm there, David Banner is there, and so many others who are incredible spokespersons for the truth. So I want to invite some amazing educators up, people who are going to talk to me about these issues and help me personally to understand what is happening and really help us get a little bit deeper into the conversation. So let me make sure I have the names correctly. I want to say it properly. We're first going to have Sharif L. Mekki, the CEO of Center for Black Educator Development, the Center for Black Educator Development, and also Jennifer Lopez, who is a teacher in Los Angeles. So thank you, Sharif, and also Jennifer, for joining. I'm so happy to have you on with me this evening.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for having us. And thanks for that video. It was very powerful.
Thank you. Did I say your name properly? Is it Sharif?
You nailed it. Sharif El Mekki. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. And Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us. So we're going to talk a little bit, Sharif, I want to start with you about the data. We've heard all of this data tonight. I know you've been listening in. Would you say that the data represents, and the content of what's in that video, that it represents and reflects what you're seeing across the country as you're working with educators? And how are you trying to address this at your organization?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, everything I've heard tonight and what we saw in the video resonates deeply. And it actually, I was nodding throughout because we see a consistency that not only is this, we had a health pandemic, but that was layered on top of the racist pandemic that, our students and communities have been resisting and building despite of for centuries. We saw this when we transitioned with the rest of the globe from our Freedom School Literacy Academy, which is a paid teacher apprenticeship for high school and college youth who are interested in building and being a part of the Black teacher pipeline. We saw the youth activism, and we also teach them that the purest form of activism is teaching, and teaching Black children well, teaching truth, which is the exact opposite of what a lot of people, particularly in these political circles, are interested in. And we see that many of them don't even know what CRT is, but what they say is, it's everything we don't like. Mm-hmm. And they've used it as a magnet of, we don't know what it is, but we don't like this, we don't like that, we don't like this, and we're just going to lump it all in and make it. And they say it like they've been public about it, about how they're organizing it and how they're going to make it toxic to touch, right? But we also know that although it wasn't as vocal, we know that the lowercase CRT, culture responsive teaching, was also resisted in some circles as well. But any group that wants to ban Ruby Bridges and the letter from the Birmingham jail and other historic issues and why the institutions are functioning the way that they are, it's problematic. But what gives me hope is the youth, and we see the youth who are signing up, these Black and brown youth who are signing up to be part of this Black teacher pipeline, because they see the connection that has always existed between educational justice and racial justice. And you can't pursue one without ensuring that you're pursuing the other.
Jennifer, let me ask you a very, very targeted question. Mm-hmm. You as a teacher, what year did you teach? What was
when did I start teaching?
No, the grade of your students. What
they're fifth grade.
Great. So do you teach critical race theory in your classroom?
I do bring concepts or the ideas that are like culturally relevant, like their histories within it. And I do my best to, one thing I particularly do at the beginning of the year is many of my students are Latinx students. So I bring in the Chicano Latinx kind of pipeline and have them go through that, dissect that. So many of the the tenets within critical race theory, like the counter stories within history, I also teach.
Okay, but are you teaching them your beliefs and sort of theories that are in terms of your opinions of what happened in our history? Is that what you're going into? Or are you sticking with historic fact?
No, I definitely try to bring in different perspectives. Like, let me give you an example. Today we were covering, it's American history, 5th grade American history, and we're talking about slavery, the colonies. And instead of just focusing like the traditional textbook version of like, oh, this happened, my essential question was like, how is the aspects of slavery, how has that impacted modern day racism today? And then, so we went through the tenets of like this idea that this notion of inferiority started developing since back then, and unfortunately has carried on through today. And what are some examples we see of that? And then the students brought up, like, we see it in the news, miss, police brutality. We see it with the COVID rates, right? And BIPOC individuals oftentimes not getting the healthcare that they receive. So in those elements, I feel like that's how I bring it in. Does that kind of answer what you were getting at?
No, I mean, I want to know but I think that when I think about what critical race theory is and the concept of it, I'm just trying to understand what the big hysteria is when we know that the actual curriculum of critical race theory is something that is taught to older students. And I respect and I totally agree that history needs to be taught in the classroom because young people need to know who they are and they need to know their background. And so I guess for you, Sharif, the same question applies. Is this something that, you know, we're all wrong about and teachers are teaching critical race theory to 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th year olds?
No, and you know what, and what it is white supremacy in action is just navigating the current space. This is a backlash from the response, including in the white community, to the George Floyd murder. That was so public, and they saw that. I think anytime you see anyone starting to say like, hey, we need to question these institutions that make this okay, there's going to be a backlash. And what we're seeing is an example of that. This, you know, anytime you see some progress, anytime you see unification, anytime you see people are starting to recognize and address anti-Blackness, anti-Latinx, anti-immigrant, like there's going to be a concerted effort, an organized and well-funded and well-publicized effort to you know, put us back in our place. Like that has always been the narrative. And you mentioned something earlier about us being vigilant and not just kind of stand on the sideline and just allowing things to happen. Like, absolutely not. This is a time to stand up, speak up, and even more importantly, for people who are outside of the system to be able to provide cover, because they are firing people. They are threatening to decertify people. They are moving people out of classrooms and schools. We saw it in Texas. We see it in other places. So what we have to make sure is that we are raising the stakes and we are being organized in our efforts to make sure that we're providing protection. We need to make sure that our civil rights organizations are also doing counter lawsuits, because this is absolutely injustice. It is, you know, when they're frequently want to talk about, you know, the Constitution and the rights that people have. This is a violation to try to silence and censor and basically fear mongering. Imagine the amount of educators who are already the challenge of already teaching, the challenge of teaching post pandemic, the challenge of how many educators are already struggling with deep content expertise, and then just the challenge of a new teacher now trying to navigate this and wondering like, oh, if a student asks me this, or what about this in the curriculum? As Jennifer said, I say multiple perspectives, but also as often as possible, primary sources, sharing what what actually happened in fact, but also in their voices of like how they crafted institutions to marginalize some. When I was a teacher, I wanted my students to leave with critical thinking skills and starting with 3 questions. Anything that they were engaging with, reading about, discussing, whose voices, perspective, and experiences are being centered, and whose voices, perspective, and experiences are being marginalized and are missing. Even if we have critical thinkers who are always thinking about that, whether they're watching the news, or whether they're seeing, watching a speech, or they're reading an article, if they're thinking about, wait a minute, whose voices, perspective, and experience are not here, and they're pursuing that, then that is the critical thinking that we need. So some of this is going to actually backfire because we're going to see more youth that we work with, these youth who are saying like, oh no, I'm already concerned about racial justice, but now I want to lead a classroom because I can see that's where the nexus of all this is occurring. And this is what I can do. I can lead a classroom and make sure that I am teaching truth. I am teaching accurate history. I am making sure that our youth and our community's contributions in this world, in civilization, in this society are uplifted and that they're not marginalized. So hope is on the way. Hope and help are on the way in the presence of our youth.
Yeah, the teachers and the participation of our families, that is the hope. And so, Jennifer, the laws that are being passed across the country, how will they impact your instruction? And what do you think it will do to your students if you are unable to say certain words, if you're unable to even speak to, as you said, the realities of what has happened in our history?
You know what? I'm in California where I'm fortunate enough that we're a little bit more progressive. So I haven't had any restrictions yet on the type of words or curriculum I can teach. We actually recently just passed the ethnic studies requirement for high school, so which is really awesome that they can teach this concept to high school students. I think it's very important to know about their cultures and history. So I'm really doing my best every day to think about how can I bring in these concepts, whether it be in history, in math, in reading, in writing, or bringing in current events that connect to the students' lives and also that they've seen to have these like productive discussions. And then the second piece you had mentioned about, can you remind me again? Sorry, it was.
No, I was saying, what will it do to the young people if you as a teacher, how do you feel about how your young people will be impacted if they are prevented from learning about their history?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's a value in students see when we talk about their Latinx history and culture, the students, they see themselves in the content and they're like, man, I'm valuable. Like, I love this. I can make connections to it. And if that's taken away from them, there's a piece of them that maybe the engagement may drop. There's a sense of, do I feel safe here at school? Do I have to be aware of what I say? They can't be their full selves. And school should be a safe place where students can have these productive conversations and really engage in this content because it's important for them so that they can leave us afterwards and be those change makers that we want them to be, right?
So, Cherie, what do you think states or districts should be doing and what should they be prioritizing to make progress on these issues? What do you think that the states, and I know you talked about, which is a really important point, that we have to make sure we emphasize that organizations, advocates, and people outside the system should be keeping a watchful eye and also speaking up and doing their part to bring attention to what is happening and to help fight for teachers who are trying to do the right thing. But what do you think that the states and districts should be doing, and how can they protect teachers and also students?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely critical, this is where leaders are supposed to lead. And so district leaders should be very clear, very vocal, and adamant about how they are going to protect educators, that they are going to stand firm about what pedagogical framework should look like, what cultural responsiveness should look like, what proficiency, what's culturally proficient and what's culturally destructive, and how culturally destructive language and policies and curricula, which has been pushed on schools and districts for a really long time, they have to make sure that they are standing firm and also being clear. Like, this is about, while people are saying like, oh, this makes children uncomfortable, they're talking about white children. And we would say, like, many white children are actually saying, like, no, we actually want to be well informed. We actually want to be part of a larger society. And when we're talking about like comfort of children, where were you thinking about children's comfort when they were going to schools named after enslavers, murderers, and rapists? When they're using curriculum where they're erased and treated not even as a footnote, but just as a stowaway in society and civilization's contributions. So school boards, district leaders, state boards of education, all of them should be banded together and standing firm against this this injustice that's being waged against our children, our communities, and curriculum and content that's culturally responsive and proficient.
Well, Sharif, you are straight with no chaser. I'd love to hear you speak it straight to the point. You're pulling, holding no punches. And we need that. Jennifer, what do teachers need?
We need training on these concepts. We want to teach them. You see the data, it says we want to teach about race and racism, but giving us the resources, giving us the trainings, giving us the time to plan. I know last year during the pandemic, I did a lot of research on statistics on BIPOC individuals to bring in COVID rates for my students to kind of analyze data and stats, but that took time, right? So it's like, how do you give us that planning time to do so and give us that training to do it well and effectively? Because we all want to do it. It's just giving us those resources to do so.
Thank you. And so training sounds like that's something that you are doing, Sharif, and the development piece is there. So the connections need to be made. And I think that is so important. You want to teach the concepts, but you want to do it properly and you want to make sure you have the right information. I love that, Jennifer. Sharif, we appreciate you for being with us. Sharif El-Mekki, the CEO of Center for Black Educator Development. Thank you for being with us, Jennifer. We're going to keep you to stay with us and finish up the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you to my fellow panelists. The conversation we are having is critical, and it's urgent that others take what we learned here tonight and keep it going to continue the conversation in their districts and schools. Now, I want to talk to you about how we can take action on this issue. As we know, states across the country are proposing or passing legislation that limits the ability of teachers to talk about race, racism, and the history of underrepresented populations in the classroom. You can support your fellow teachers by writing to ask your state leaders to pledge and stand up against any education censorship law that limits how diversity-based and culturally relevant content is included in the classroom. You can do this by clicking on the link below or scanning the QR code on the screen. The form will automatically identify who your state leadership is and already has a pre-drafted message to them. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us as we discuss CRE in the classroom. We appreciate your time and your action moving forward.
Sydney, you're back.
I'm back. Oh my gosh, what amazing conversations. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that call to action. And Tamika, wow, that video is so powerful. Thank you from all of us at E4E for being a part of this really important project. It is so important that we break the myth that critical race theory is being taught in schools. It is not. But culturally relevant education that's about the accurate teaching of history, that is what is needed in all of our classrooms. CRT is not the same as CRE. We can't let those acronyms confuse us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sydney. It's a pleasure to have been a part of this conversation tonight. I know more. I'm much deeper in my understanding of what is happening, of the problem, and also the solutions. And I also realize we have a lot of work to do. We have work to do here. We have work to do in so many places within so many systems in this country that have been in place for far too long, that needed to be upgraded prior to a pandemic. And now there are people who post George Floyd's murder and other things that have happened from a racial perspective in our society, they want to take away the little bit that we have left. And we can't allow that. Not only do we have to fight to secure our rights and to secure the sacredness of education for our youth, we also have to increase it. We have to increase the teachers of color who are in the classroom. And as Jennifer said, there needs to be more training and more understanding for teachers who want to teach certain things within their classroom. So
that is right. As you said, we have so much work to do, and it is why tonight is just the start. And so at E4E, we will be taking these national campaigns to states and districts across the country, because we know that education decision-making is fractured, and the federal government can do some things, but the vast majority of this work, it needs to happen locally in states, in districts, and in schools across the country. And so, in fact, next week is actually the official Teacher Appreciation Day and Teacher Appreciation Week. But at E4E, we know that a day and even a week, it is not enough to celebrate amazing educators. And so typically, we like to turn the whole month of May into Teacher Appreciation Month. But this year, we are going to be celebrating Teacher Action Month. And it is going to be a month of action by teachers on behalf of their students and their profession.
Wow. Well, I'm all here for that. And we need to know these dates and be celebrating them and celebrating our teachers. But as you said, getting into the action. E4E has asked all of us, educators have asked all of us tonight, and I am personally asking each and every one of you to take the time to get into the action. We know our public schools are in crisis. We know that our students are under attack. We know our teachers are under attack, and we need our federal government, our governors, and all of you to step up and to demand action. So I need everyone, lottie-dottie and everybody is what we would say on this event to take all three of these important action steps. There's a slide up. You can see what the slide is saying. Our educators need your help. Our students deserve so much more, and our nation requires it. So I'm going to give each of you a few seconds to take these action steps if you haven't already. Take a screenshot of the screen so that you can have it with you, and make sure you do each one of these things. Just make sure that you are in the action. Support teacher leadership to help retain our educators. We can't lose more teachers. We need better teachers, stronger teachers, the same teachers, however you want to look at it. We need them in the classroom. We need to strengthen our teachers and make sure that they are the right ones to be there teaching our young people. And we particularly need more teachers of color. Make sure that our schools have the mental health and academic support necessary to recover from this crisis. We've been in a crisis, and we're still in it today. We're coming back, but what does coming back really mean? And how can we ensure that our schools are strengthened from the mental health that and the disruption that has happened with all that we've seen happen in the last few years? And take action to ensure we don't erase our history. Make sure that folks are not able to take away our ability to teach our youth critically important and relevant education and information, not critical race theory, but critical race and information, education, and information that they need to know about themselves and our nation. Sydney, it's a lot.
It is. It's a lot, but we've got to do it because it's all about the kids, and this is our future. So, I just want to thank you, Tamika, for joining us tonight, for leading us in these important and big conversations, and importantly, for your advocacy and your leadership. We really appreciate it.
I want to thank you, and I would love to just say to you and Evan, that I appreciate so much the work that you're doing and the fact that you're making space and understanding the importance of uplifting the voice of teachers, educators, and advocates of color. We just want to say that we wish all the love and support to educators for excellence so that you can continue to do what you're doing to advocate for teachers across the country and to make sure we have a more equitable education system, because ultimately all of us are responsible to young minds and the impressions of our young people who will make up the leaders of our society going forward.
That's right. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That is all for tonight, but look for more coming your way tomorrow and throughout Teacher Appreciation Month, or I should say Teacher Action Month. We got lots of work to do. We can't wait to dig in together. Have a great night, everyone.